Ladies and gentlemen, Seahawk fans of all ages, guten tag, buenas noches, how do? It's Josh from the We Talk Seahawks podcast back with another episode of We Talk to 12's. And today I have an absolute treat because I've been listening to this man for a long time on his podcast. And I'm so happy that he's chose to come on and speak to me about his history with the Seahawks, what makes him such a good podcaster. So without further ado, let me introduce you to my guest, Dan Viens. Dan, how's it going?
It's going great. It's always great to connect with a 12 from across the pond. I've had a couple on my show. It's my first time being on yours, and the pleasure is mine.
Oh, thank you very much, man. No, like I said, I've listened to your pod for a long time, obviously through all the changeover and whatnot, and I've watched your videos on YouTube. I think the content and the fact you managed to get it out so regularly is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Massive thanks for shouting us out on your pod the other day as well. That was a massive surprise. I didn't expect that when I was watching the YouTube video. But yeah, I mean, so this pod, as people who have listened, if you're only tuning in now because Dan's on, thank you very much. But this is less so an analysis of the Seahawks. It's more me talking to a fellow 12 about what they love about the Seahawks. So Let's get into it. Dan,
absolutely.
Tell us, how did you start supporting Seattle? Why Seattle?
So I'm born and raised here, first of all, and I've just always been one of those ever since I started. It was fifth grade when I realized that I loved sports. I started to connect with sports, and this is my home. And I've never been one of those sports fans that can attach to another team, and I know them, and I know you know them too. I have friends that are like, they're Laker fans in basketball and they love the Red Sox in baseball. And if you grew up there and you moved and you relocated, fine, but I just could never do that. And so I am what I am. I am a supporter of all things Seattle and Northwest, except for the University of Washington, because I went across state to Washington State University. That's a different story. But so, I was 13, 14 when the Seahawks were born in 1976. Gives you a little idea of how old I am. And it was a big deal. And the Kingdom was like just the Taj Mahal to me, as ugly and dark and dank as that building was, like, to me, it was the greatest thing in the world. And I had a father who liked sports enough that he would take me to some games. And actually, he got season tickets early on. I think he had them in the inaugural season. I remember going to some games at that age, and then he got rid of them. And then we got him back in '84. We've had him ever since. And I've been the caretaker of those tickets now since the early 2000s. And so he took me to games, and I just remember being struck by, I'll never forget, there's a moment where you're walking up. You've seen the pictures of the old Kingdom. It had the kind of the wave shaped ramps on the outside that you walked around to get in. And so there was this really dramatic kind of moment where you walked into the stadium and it all sort of opened up and unfolded in front of you. And I thought it was the most grand thing I'd ever seen, because it's the only thing I'd ever seen. Right now we're spoiled. Lumen Field and T-Mobile Park, I think, are two of the greatest sports facilities in the country, and they're side by side. So I was just captured by it from a young age, and just the theater of it, and really, really got into it. That started my love of sports at a level of learning all the players, learning their numbers, looking into stats. Back then we had hard paper newspapers. I would read the paper every morning, look at the box scores. And Seahawks weren't always good back then, but I connected with them, and it hasn't gone anywhere. And it's only grown over time as I've gotten more involved in just how I observe them.
I see. You're talking about sort of the Lumen and sort of T-Mobile. Now I went and did some work in Seattle. I was fortunate enough to do 2 weeks there, and I didn't realize how close the stadiums actually were until you drive up the freeway into Seattle and you literally see them both next to each other. It was astounding. And then walking towards Lumen, I'm absolutely gutted that the season wasn't on because I couldn't go and watch a game. Yeah. All I could do was peer through the gates and think, one day I'll get back here. I attribute what you were saying about supporting a hometown club very much. So we've got the Premier League, or the Premier League, as you'd say over there. And Manchester United, obviously being one of the biggest teams, you can be from anywhere and you find a Man United supporter, which is really odd. We as UK fans gravitate towards American sports as something different, and you tend to pick a team based on a few different factors. whether you like the color or you like a certain player or anything like that. So the fact you've been there since sort of day dot, say 1973, was it 74?
76. I think
76. Oh, sorry, I've taken some years off you there,
the
dude.
first season. Yeah.
Yeah, dude, that is amazing. I'm really, really sad at myself for getting the date wrong as well, because I've got it on my hat and everything. But with that, obviously, you've grown from being a fan to being a sports journalist, a broadcaster in sort of the Seahawks sort of sphere. You said you've had two Brits on before in Rob Statter, and you had Matty F. Brown as well, who's
Yeah,
been
of
the
course.
booking
Those
guest
guys are
on our
great.
pod.
Love
They're
those guys.
brilliant. Now, tell me about your journey into sort of the sports broadcasting side with the Seahawks and where you are now.
Sure. So I actually went to school for it and have a degree in broadcast journalism. And it wasn't as if once I realized I like sports, that's what I gravitated towards and realized I wanted to do. In fact, I was one of those kids that, going through my senior year in high school, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I was all set to go to a smaller university. I knew I wanted to go to college. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And then kind of at the last minute, Washington State came into the picture. And so that's where I landed. And that only helped grow my love of sports. Just the sports programs over there and the atmosphere over there, very rural land grant, small town university. So the communications thing was something that appealed to me. And they had a world renowned, one of the top rated broadcasting schools in the country, the Edward R. Murrow School of Communications. And so I wanted to get into that, and I knew I wanted to talk about sports. And at that time, we're talking early 90s. That's when ESPN was kind of in its infancy. So early 90s, ESPN was like a guy in his garage in front of a plywood background. I mean, that's what those old tapes look like.
Yep.
And so for me, the idea of sports broadcasting was the local newscasts, right? I wanted to be that guy that came on for 5 minutes and told you what was going on in sports. And that was my focus in school. And when I got out, I ended up there are two directions you can take. You can go to a big market. I could have come home to Seattle and gotten an internship, probably started out as a production assistant, maybe done some writing and really tried to work my way up that way. Or I could go to a small market and get on camera right away. And that's what I chose to do. And for the first year, I had to focus mostly on news, but I had a great mentor because the sports director at that station, a little place called KEPR TV in Pasco, Washington, CBS station. The sports director there was Jeff Rickard. I actually had the pleasure of having him on my show a couple of weeks ago after 20 years of hardly talking to the man. He knew my passion for sports. He knew I wanted to do what he was doing, but he was a one-man band. So he would get me involved. He would, whenever I was available, he would have me go shoot games and things like that. So I ended up getting his job a year later when he moved on. And even though we were in Eastern Washington, a couple hundred miles away, we covered the Seahawks. And that gave me my first opportunity to really sort of connect with them and cover them as a journalist. We would get credentials to come over for training camp and be able to sit in on the interviews and talk to players and talk to coaches. And so, that was a kid growing up here. It was all kind of my two dreams converging, right? So fast forward a bit, because this story can get really long. I did that for about 6 years. Ended up going to Bismarck, North Dakota, to be the sports director of the NBC station there for a couple of years. And to be honest with you, that's a place that if I had the patience, I could have stayed there for a very long time until I got a bigger break. Even though it was a very small market, it was a dominant TV station. We ruled our market. But I was, at the time I was married and had young kids, and the money at that level of broadcasting back then just wasn't very significant. And so I had to make the hard decision to get out of it. As I said, to fast forward, the beauty of all this is then the internet age explodes. And then the podcast thing happened. And so I was able to reconnect. I was trying to think of the year the other day. I think it was 2015. A website called NFL Mocks reached out to me just through my Twitter account. They liked some of my input there and asked me if I'd write for them. And that kind of knocked off the rust and rekindled the passion a little bit. And so I wrote for a number of websites over the years. And that led to me deciding to start my own podcast. And you've mentioned it. My podcast has kind of evolved and changed names and concepts.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to try to talk about everything. I used to try to involve the Mariners and some other stuff too. And then I got a break. And sometimes that's what has to happen for you to get to where you want to get to, right? The folks from Field Goals, who was one of the most influential Seahawk blogs that I ever started reading years ago, reached out to me, liked what I was doing on my own show, had an opening on their podcast, and offered me that slot to co-host with Dana O'Gorman. That only lasted for a season because Vox Media decided to shutter their podcast department, basically. But what it did is it allowed me to realize that just focusing on the Seahawks as a podcaster was my sweet spot. And that's what I wanted to do. I love my Mariners and they're killing it right now, but I like enjoying them as a fan. I don't like analyzing them as much as I do football. Baseball's a different language. And so I knew that was my passion. And then when Vox decided to shut down podcasts, I just, I carried on and rebranded and was able to take that fan base over to the new show. And it's just really kind of grown from there. And I'm really excited about where it's headed.
And it's like as a listener and a viewer, the organic growth, like the guests you've had on, the conversations you have, I really enjoyed your pod or your video from a few days ago, it might have been last week, where you were discussing the offensive line with the offensive line scout. I thought that was really intriguing.
Sanjit, the football scout.
Yeah, dude, he was brilliant. Shout out to him.
He's great.
As a big boy coming from a contact sport like rugby myself, I tend to focus on the big boys.
Sure.
Everyone likes a flashy player.
That's where it all starts, man.
If you can tackle and hit, you're my guy. That's the way I sort of attribute my love to American football. I just regret the fact I never got to play it before I injured myself. And for the way he broke it down, the way he broke down how the players did, their placement, how well they handled certain sort of stunts and their techniques, and I thought was absolutely brilliant. So anyone who's listening, if that's the type of content you need, check out one of Dan's pods. Just check out his pod in general. Now going anytime, man. Talking about sort of your love for the Seahawks, you've been a fan since the inception.
Oh yeah.
Who would you say is your favorite ever Seahawks player?
God, that's a tough one. I knew this was coming. Yeah. And I think I've settled on my answer, but I have to qualify it a little bit because, it changes over time, obviously, right? I mean, for most of the last 10 years, it was probably Russell Wilson, right? I have half a closet full of Russell Wilson jerseys. I just can't wear them right now. I think I actually thought of this the other day. I think when I moved to my new place and set up my new studio, I think I'm going to frame one of his jerseys that I have and have it displayed really nicely. Add that to the background back there. But then
the rest sell or burn.
Yeah. Maybe get him to sign it one day. But if you look, so I have some tattoos, and if you look at my arms, you would think that. So I have Steve Largent here, right?
Oh, nice.
I don't know how well you can see that.
Yeah.
There you go. And then on the inside of my forearm, I don't know if you'll be able to see that very well. I got beast mode, right? So that's not because they're my favorite players. Steve was because I think he's arguably the greatest player in Seahawks history. And beast mode is because he looks cool. I love me some beast mode, but when you're thinking about getting a tattoo, it's about aesthetics, right? For me, when I think about who moved me the most and who I connected with the most and who I just genuinely loved watching his journey, I keep coming back to Matt Hasselbeck. I'm a huge Matt Hasselbeck fan. Also have a bunch of his jerseys. And I just appreciated so much how he kind of came from nothing and had to fight through, he had the battles with Trent Dilfer. He had some adversity he had to overcome. And also the fact that he had to fight a lot of doubt, and I lived with one. My father and I would go round and round and round about Matt Hasselbeck. He thought he was terrible. And every year he'd find someone that he thought should replace him based on how they did in the preseason. Seneca Wallace was his guy for years. But I just don't think Matt ever really got the respect he deserved. But when you look at his numbers and when you look what he did for that team under Mike Holmgren, getting us to our first Super Bowl, He wasn't the perfect quarterback, but the argument I used to always make when I would debate with one of his detractors was, during the time that he was our starting quarterback, who else in the league would you rather have? And then they would list 10 to 12 names, right? Because that's about probably where he sat in the league. And then my follow-up question would be, okay, well, how are you going to get one of those guys? Like, Matt was as good as we had at the moment, but I just loved the way he approached the game. I loved how hard he played, and I loved his interviews. He was always transparent. He always took accountability. It's no surprise that he went on to get into broadcasting after his playing days. I got to go with Matt, man.
I think that's a solid shout. Matt Hasselbeck was the quarterback when I first started watching the Seahawks, and I instantly at the time started doing all the research on him, finding out he obviously was a backup for Brett Favre and then coming through and whatnot. And I just love I love the underdog mentality of someone like him, because even though he gets, it's very, I attribute it very much to how Gino was perceived last season.
Yeah,
and I'll admit,
similar.
I've said it in previous pods, I was a Gino doubter. I was all on the Drew Lock train, and
you and I were on the same train.
Yeah, dude, I know. I was listening to your pod going, yes, someone else, and now we're both like, oh no. But I look at that, and the parallels that I can see are there. So they've gone from being backups to getting the chance to start to not necessarily being, say, a top 10, what Gino arguably last season was, but to being the face of the franchise at quarterback, and the locker room seemingly loving them both.
Yeah.
So Matt Hasselbeck, every player that I've heard talk about him, they will always speak about him in glowing references, about his character, about how he was very genuine, and that's
a good word. Yeah,
you gravitate towards. And Gino seems to be very much the same as well.
He does indeed. I'll give you a little bonus opinion here. I don't know if I've ever said this on a hot mic. The Super Bowl in 2005, I can't remember the names, whatever Super Bowl that was. Super Bowl 40? When they lost to the Steelers.
Yeah. When they got screwed by the refs.
See, now hold on. This is where thank you for setting me up. You just threw me a fastball down the middle, because you're in the majority, right? The vast majority of the Seahawks fan base believes that we lost that game because of the referees. We lost that game. Well, there were a couple of key injuries that cannot be denied in that game. First of all, Marquand Manuel getting hurt was huge. But as much as I just spent a couple of minutes talking about my love for Matt Hasselbeck, we lost that football game because of that horrendous interception he threw just as momentum was shifting and we were getting back in the football game. No excuse for that throw. It was terrible. That play cost us that Super Bowl as much as any call or perceived call or missed call by the officials in that game. So just being accountable there.
I'll give you that one completely. I'm going to take it. That goes down as one of your least favorite Seahawks moments.
You know what, though? One other thing that I can hear the devil's advocate. I can hear the other debater coming back at me with, I believe it was the play immediately before it where there was one of those calls. Didn't that interception come right after the Sean Locklear holding call that should not have been a holding call?
I think so, because
I think it came right after,
penalty, wasn't it?
On the Jeremy Stevens throw down to like the 2, which was a beautiful throw, a dart from Hasselbeck. So yeah, I mean, both sides of the argument can have their argument there. I think within a 2-play span, I'd have to go back and look. But
I like how you're bringing the balance. Usually on our main podcast, and We Talk Seahawks, it's me being the Switzerland, the balance in between the two. So I'm totally stepping to one side, and you're taking up that space.
I've become more that way as I've aged. I used to be the hothead, blinders on, rose-colored glasses. Like, I used to be that guy and that fan. So I'm more understanding of that fan when I encounter them on Twitter or whatever. They can only see one thing and only see it one way. But I think age, wisdom, but also just as a podcaster and having my own show and wanting to I really get off on getting the whole picture, the 360 degree view, as I call it. I think it's hard to do that if you're overly biased. So I try to be open-minded.
I agree completely. And this is where, like I said, in our normal pod, that's usually my thing. I do blow my top at some things. Tackle technique is one of my biggest bugbears at the moment. So if you ever listen to the pod and you hear me ranting, which is very rare, it's usually because of blown tackle techniques and people with bad hand placement, feet placement or not dipping the hips in order to project into attack. Well, I could go on. It's my baby from contact sports. But
yeah, I was going to say, you're talking some rugby terms there too.
And it's transferable. The Seahawks were taught tackle technique by an ex-Fijian international.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you know rugby, you'd question why they got a Fijian, because they're really flashy with the ball, but defense isn't their best point. So anyway, back onto Seahawks. So you've told me about your favorite player. Completely agree. Your least favorite moment, absolutely fine. What's your favorite moment as a Seahawk fan?
You know, there's some obvious ones, right? I was there for Beastquake. Although my seats at the time that year, he was running away from us, which gave me a unique view, though, because there was a moment where it looked like he disappeared into the pile. Although even when that happened, was pretty sure we got the first down. I don't think that gets talked about enough. I'll just a little side note here. Being there for the Beastquake is everyone focuses on the entirety of the run because it's amazing. It's one of the greatest runs, if not the greatest run in NFL history, right up there with that Barry Sanders one where he cuts like Jukes 27 dudes, or the Earl Campbell one where they tear his jersey and he's dragging guys down the field. But all we needed there was a first down to basically ice the game. And so there were two waves of noise from the crowd. There was the first one when you realize you got the first down, and then there was the one when you realized that it just wasn't going to stop. So that's an obvious one. And then the tip is another obvious one. And for that one, I had switched to the opposite corner, and that's where my seats are to this day. So I was literally looking down on top of it. It came right at us. But I'll put it this way. Excuse me. I'll go back to my favorite player, because to me, my most enduring memory is the 2005 championship game against the Carolina Panthers, because it was the first time. It was the first time we had made it to that level. And that game, I have said it before, I'll say it again, the noise level at Lumen Field will never, ever, ever again match that. If you go back and watch the TV copy of that game, the Fox, I think it was Fox, from the moment they came on to introduce themselves, the announcers, and get into the pregame a little bit, till the final whistle, that crowd stood on their feet, screamed as loud as they could scream the entire game. It wasn't, hey, they're in the huddle now, let's ramp it up. It wasn't just on defense. It was the whole game. Jake Delhomme said it absolutely wrecked them and their play calling. And there was a moment in that game when it got so loud, I couldn't even speak to the person next to me. I've been at some pretty loud rock concerts. That was an intense moment. I was going to go with the moment against the Redskins in the playoffs earlier in that, when Matt Hasselbeck ran for a touchdown and held the ball up over his head. You remember that one? It was raining and he slid. But I think it was just that 2005 NFC Championship game is something that sticks with me to this day. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. I don't think we'll ever see that again.
So this is why I love these conversations, because you get a unique perspective that myself, being in the UK and a lot of our fans around the world, sort of Germany, France, I think we've got some people in Malaysia as well. But when we hear those stories, it's not something, unless you've been to the stadium for one of those key moments, you don't get to feel it. We see it on TV. Yeah. We're there in spirit, but we aren't there in the thick of it like you guys are. So that's I'm waiting one day I will get to pick a game where I can come to Seattle. Absolutely. And I will experience that moment.
And we'll have a pint.
100%. You're speaking my love language now, Dan.
Or five.
Yeah, I was going to say that's more like it. I mean, if we're looking at the sort of past, your favorite moments there, we spoke about your favorite ever player, and I know you cover this quite a lot on your pod. But what do you think of the current roster when we look at last year's draft, just completely changing the game, and the draft this year, which I'm just as, if not even more excited by? What do you think of our roster, the makeup of it, how it's balanced? How would you sort of look at it in comparison to, say, the last 5 or 6 years rosters?
Yeah, well, I think to answer the last part of that question first, I think it's the deepest, most talented, most dynamic roster we've had since 2014.
100%.
I liked the roster a lot better a month ago than I do today. the injuries have started to pile up in such a way that I've got some concerns. In that first 4-game stretch before the bye that I thought was pretty manageable, albeit with some good matchups against some good teams. I don't know. I'm concerned about receiver, obviously with the JSN news. I'm not concerned because we have so much talent at the top, and we can mitigate some of that with the tight end group. But man, if Tyler DK gets dinged up in the next 6 weeks, now I think we're really hurting. But I'm really, really concerned about the interior defensive line, more so than I was a month ago, because we haven't seen Cameron Young, and Pete didn't sound all that optimistic he was going to get back in the next week or two. And then the news yesterday that Mike Morris had a procedure done on his shoulder, and Pete didn't sound all that optimistic. It's an old injury. That concerns me that they knew about it when they drafted him. We don't know how extensive that is, how long he'll be out, because you've probably heard me say it on my pod. I've done an entire episode about it. They were going to be hunting defensive linemen at the cut down, if not before anyway. Now I think that they're looking for either 2, potentially 3 players there, or higher impact. And I think we might be talking about maybe more than just a waiver claim here now. And we might be, John Schneider might be burning up the phones looking to deal for some impact there, because I just, I like the 3 starters. I like Jaron Reed, Draymond Jones, and Mario Edwards is a good, solid journeyman, but the depth just isn't there. There's some interesting players, but Cameron Young and Mike Morris were the 2 defensive linemen they focus on in the draft. The draft when, we're hearing it now because of how well he's performing in Philadelphia, that they passed on Jalen Carter, when that was the biggest, most glaring need on the roster. And they addressed it with Morris and Young, and now neither of those guys are on the field. So I'm very, very concerned. Can you cover up for it for a couple of weeks? Can you scheme around it? Sure. But this is a talent-driven league. And if you just don't have the horses up front, teams are going to figure out how to attack that. And that really concerns me. Can the offense outscore teams, even if the defense is getting pushed around a little bit up front? And the results in the preseason have been better. Mm-hmm. Their run defense has been dramatically better this preseason. And if anyone says preseason doesn't matter, it translated last year because they stunk against the run in the preseason, and that carried over into the season. So those are my 2 big concerns. I'm mildly concerned about the receiver position right now. I'm significantly worried about the defensive line.
This is, like I said, about my love for the big boys. I mentioned it in the last pod. Mike Morris, pod favorite, our draft expert, pegged him as a Seahawk from even pre-draft. Having looked at all of his tape, I love him. I think he's going to be fantastic for us. But the injuries that keep mounting up on these rookies, it really concerns me as a sports coach, because if you're going to take that step up from college, which essentially, in my opinion here, it'd be semi-pro, reaching that top level when you're in college, to the pros, you should be conditioned there or thereabouts to be able to handle what the pros give you. You should be able to take that beating and take that punishment. But we especially within the league have this weird habit of just injuring rookies. It's like we put them out. It's like, right, straight into the meat grinder, and you've got a weekend, you're out. Brilliant. That's 6 weeks, which concerns me. And I know it's a big concern for Seahawks fans everywhere. I'm optimistic about the way our D-line is going to look when everyone's back healthy. I genuinely do think Mike Morris will become the starting 3 tech over probably Mario Edwards, or potentially, depending on how well Jaron Reed's gone into nose tackle now. So Mario Edwards, I think, who's going to end up moving. And then Cam Young, we have to wait and see what he can do. Hopefully he's a good run stuffer. I think you were talking about the wide receivers. That is, we could have a whole conversation about that. And preseason hype with Jake Bobo and loads of the others. But what do you think about the edge class we've currently got?
I think it's one of the most dynamic roster spots or personnel groups on that roster. It's amazing how quickly they've been able to put that together, because it was just a couple of years ago that we got tired of hearing Pete say you can never have too many edge rushers, and we had none, and they kept going out and making these knee-jerk moves and trading for Jadeveon Clowney and signing guys like Carlos Dunlap and signing guys like Kerry Hyder, and we just didn't have the depth there. Even when we went and traded for Jadeveon Clowney, we include Jacob Martin in the deal, who was kind of a young edge player on the rise. what they've done with draft resources in the last 3 years and then signing Uchenna Nwosu was just a brilliant free agent move. Great example of projecting a player to be more than he is because you're going to expand his role, getting him at a good number and then giving him a chance to be an everyday player. That group is one that can sustain an injury, can withstand an injury. And they have. Darrell Taylor hasn't played in the preseason. Darrell Taylor's going to add to that group. And then you've got the leap forward that guys have taken. Boye Mafe in his second year looks like a complete player
outstanding,
now.
Doesn't he?
Absolutely.
Everything.
Derek Hall looks like the real deal, a guy that can contribute as a rookie. That's exciting. Tyreek Smith looks like the guy that Carroll's been talking about for a year and a half that finally is healthy. He's going to contribute. And then a guy like this happens every preseason. You get a guy like Levi Bell who comes out of nowhere and makes you put him on the roster somehow, some way. They usually keep 5 edge guys. They might have to keep 6. I mean, a lot of it will depend on Taylor's shoulder, but I don't know how you keep that guy off the roster. It's the one thing that I think helps minimize a little bit the interior line stuff because, and we've seen it in the preseason. Again, you talk about translating to the regular season. Seahawks have put as much consistent pressure on the opposing quarterback in the 2 preseason games as I've seen in a preseason since Averill and Bennett and those guys and some of the depth they had behind those guys in the Super Bowl years. That's the part that excites me, is that group's going to make it. They're going to clean up some of that mess. They're going to make it easier on some of those young secondary players. And they're going to be fun to watch. I think that pass rush is going to be legit this year.
And they're going to be fun to watch for a few years as well. And this is the leap Marfe's made, and you see it in all the preseason games where he can contain the run, he can stuff the run, he's getting into the backfield, he's putting pressure on the quarterback. That is something that you wouldn't have seen last year, mainly because he had a bit part.
Yeah.
Derek Hall, I am intrigued by. I am absolutely fascinated by that man for his measurables. I think he's shown what he can do. He's got a great first step to get inside. He's got some great speed to power as well, and sometimes just power to speed. He can knock someone off and then just cut. Yeah. I think this is going to be an edge class that, if we nurture it right, will serve us well for 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm really excited about.
That's the exciting part. They fixed a problem and they fixed it long term. They've done that with the offensive line. They've done that with a couple of position groups that a couple of years ago were shallow and concerning. It's the one thing that gives me pause when people ask, just where I feel like this team is in relative to contending in the NFC. And I do think they're a notch below Philadelphia, San Francisco. And that's the only reason is if in next offseason, if they address the defensive line the way that they have those other position groups we just talked about, now you're talking about a long-term perennial contender. And I think they will. I think it's really the only position group left that they haven't addressed in that manner, other than, giving $56 million to Draymond Jones.
Well, I'm not making comment on Draymond Jones because I want to see him in the regular season to see exactly how well he does before I pass judgment. I hope he's worth the money because we have other people on the roster that might not be. But less said about that, the better. So with the view on our roster, I think you've kind of alluded to how you think the future of this franchise is going to look this season. Playoffs, maybe slightly deeper.
Well, I think they're a playoff team. I do, and not just because of the improvements on the roster and the infusion of young talent. I think it's a more balanced roster. I think it's built to win, especially on offense. It used to be that we felt good about the defense. We were concerned about the offense. This team's going to score, and that covers up for a lot of warts, right? But also just the state of the NFC. We had some defections, and Aaron Rodgers going to the AFC, and that's where the bulk of the talent is. That's going to be a crazy fight this year to see who comes out on top over there. It's a very top heavy conference.
Yeah.
And so there's an opportunity there. I think that we're a playoff team, hands down. And I think we're on the verge, though. Let's see what Brock Purdy looks like in his second year as a starting quarterback with San Francisco, after teams have had a bunch of tape on him, had a chance to adjust to his game and his strengths and weaknesses. And I know this. I know the Seahawks mindset is that they're as good as the 49ers and they're going after them. The schedule makers played a little trick on us this year by by putting both games later in the year.
So does it go? It goes San Fran, Cowboys, San Fran, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's two in like it's two. It's not even. How does it fall? It's 2 in like 18 days or something like that we play them. But it's not until November. So it'd be nice to get one of those early in the year to kind of see where we stand. But maybe they're smarter than us and they know that those teams are going to be neck and neck. It's going to come down to the wire. Yeah, I think it's a playoff team.
Very amicably put there.
I think it's a playoff team. I don't think the division's out of the question. Ask me again in a couple of weeks what that defensive line looks like, because I think some moves are going to be made there.
Well, we'll definitely have a chat again in a couple of weeks, because if you want to come onto our main pod, I know we'll have you. And I would love to have you talk with the other guys, because I think your wealth of knowledge would help everyone sort of understand, especially people who may not have caught this pod just yet, but listen to our main pod. Yeah. I mean, for me, I see the trajectory just going up, like you said, this season, playoffs, next season, who knows? Like you said, if we address that DT sort of section of the squad.
I do think that they're, as much as I love everything they've done the last 2 years and how they've cashed in on that Russell Wilson trade, mm-hmm. I think they're one more offseason away from kind of being where Philadelphia is, where people are going to look at this roster and go, Jesus, let's pick a position group. And they're layered and stacked with young talent, and that's what keeps you in contention in this league, when money is such a big deal and when guys getting massive second contracts is such a factor, that you have to layer your roster in such a way that you don't have these big, huge crests of massive multiple contracts coming up at the same time. You can withstand that because you got next man up. And I think they're really close to being there with that.
I was literally about to say that next man up, because the next man that's probably going to have those roster, the salary talks this year is Darrell Taylor. So see what happens there.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting one. I think he's a restricted free agent after this year, right? So we still control him for one more year. But yeah, he'll be the first guy from that group, and that group is so talented, they might not want to give him a big second contract. They may do a franchise and trade thing or something. His trajectory is going to be interesting to watch.
We'll see how that one unfolds, because I've got a lot of time for him. I just think it's the injuries that are concerning. But then again, as we discussed, that seems to be a thing with our team. Now, we've spoken a lot about Seahawks. We spoke about yourself to start with and your journey into the Seahawks. Now, those of our listeners who may not have listened to your pod will not know that you are a huge fan of rock music. If you're watching this on video, there are some lovely guitars in the background there.
Yeah, neither of which I can play very well, but they're just ornamental. They're pieces of art. They're beautiful and they represent some things. So yeah.
And a little known fact, a little known fact now after your pod the other week, Dan's a huge Kiss fan.
That was the one that got me into it. Yeah. I was 12 years old. It was Christmas. My older sister opened one of her presents. It was Kiss Destroyer, and she went, I don't want this. This is stupid. And I was so taken by the cover. I said, give it to me. I'll take it. And I became a Kiss fan and saw my first concert at 13, and that got me hooked on big arena melodic anthemic rock, and I haven't really changed that much since.
I'm all on board that. I was a rock and metal DJ for a long old time. Nice. And it still holds a very special place in my heart. Although saying that, the next big stadium arena gig I'm going to is Taylor Swift with my wife. Don't judge me.
Hey, listen, I was just
I had to buy the tickets on her behalf. That's my excuse.
I'll address it because she just played a weekend here a couple weeks ago, a mile from my apartment, just right down there at Lumen Field. And I've seen all the videos and the TikToks and everything else. And it's whether you like her music or not, what she's doing right now is groundbreaking, and it's setting the bar so high for any other stadium acts ever. And this tour might be the greatest example I've ever seen of an artist actually giving back and giving fans their money's worth. And if someone had given me a ticket, I would have gone. I would gladly see a great show like that. Live music is a different animal, and I will go see bands live that I wouldn't necessarily listen to for any length of time on Spotify or buy an album for. I would 100% see that woman perform because she's just, it's like a masterclass.
I'd like to caveat. I'd like to caveat it for anyone that thinks I've lost some street cred by saying I do also get to see Paramore live as a support band, and I'm a big Paramore fan.
Another band that was just here a week ago, and I was going to. They were here on a Monday. I was going to grab a ticket that night and go see them because I love Haley Williams.
Yeah.
And then they canceled. They had a sickness in the band and rescheduled for a night that I couldn't get off work. So yeah, I have wider range of musical taste than just hard melodic rock, but that's my sweet spot.
You and I can have some conversations over Twitter, then over this, or just over Messenger, whatever.
And you know what? Not necessarily UK, but one of my favorite genres to listen to in the last 3-4 years is closer to you than it is to me. There is a massive. So my favorite genre is from that era that we talked about, right? Kiss kind of morphed into the hair band era, and that was my high school and college years growing up. So all those bands, Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Bon Jovi.
I've got images of you with
Warrant, Slaughter,
a big mullet.
Oh no! Well, we called it a bi-level back then. It wasn't a mullet. It hadn't been termed that yet. Bi-level sounded a little more friendly. But
if anybody listeners could get a photo, if you know Dan from his sort of teenage years, please put something on Twitter. Tag me. I'll tag Dan. I don't care. I need to see this.
Yeah. But that was it. And so I've always liked melodic rock music, right? Great vocalist, big choruses. Well, in America, they don't do that anymore. They just don't. And the bands that I like, even great example is band back here on the wall, Alter Bridge, right?
Yep.
Which is what, after Creed broke up, they replaced Scott Stapp with Miles Kennedy. He's actually from Spokane, Washington, by the way. And they immediately became my favorite band. Amazing singer. Tremonti's an amazing guitar player. That red guitar right there is his signature edition. He's actually autographed it. They go to Europe, they go to the UK, and they sell out. They sell out Royal Albert Hall. They sell out Wembley Arena. Here, they play the Showbox, which holds 2,000 people right down the road. It's crazy, right? So they just don't produce that kind of music anymore. That sing-songy. It's like a blend of hard rock and pop is what I'm talking about, right? That 80s rock. But in Switzerland, they do. And there are 4 or 5 bands that I have found through Spotify's unbelievable algorithm of making suggestions that still do that stuff. And if we went back in time to 1988, they would be right there with those bands. And so I listen to a lot of stuff from across the pond.
I will take recommendations from you at some point over Twitter, happily, because I'm always looking to expand my musical repertoire. Now, with talking about rock, I wanted to play a little game with you just to finish off the pod.
Well, all right.
Okay. Now, you haven't been prepped for this.
No, I have not.
I thought about this. My little ADHD brain was going off, and I thought, what would be really good to finish? So I'm going to ask you to make a rock band from current Seahawks players. And this rock band is going to be compiled of drums, bass, rhythm guitar, lead guitar, and a frontman. I will give you a description of what I believe a drummer or an instrumentalist does for the band. If you could attribute that to a current player and give us that on the pod. Are you ready?
I think so. A couple things have popped into my head already.
So there's one player, because he's got the same taste in music as us, that needs to be in this band. So drums, I put them down. They're a heavy hitter. They bring in the noise and they keep the rhythm of the band going.
The first guy that comes to mind, we're talking a rock band, right? If we were talking more of a mellow kind of R&B jazz band, I'd go Bobby Wagner, because I think you talk about holding things down, right?
Yeah.
But we're talking rock, and I'm thinking energy and a guy that hits hard, pounds the skins, a guy like Tommy Lee. I'm going to go with the new kid. Levi Bell popped into my head. He looks like a buttoned up, prim and proper white dude, but the way he plays with his hair on fire and hard and coming forward, I think he's a guy that would really drive the lower end.
That is a big dude as well. If you had him on drums, you would be replacing skins every single gig.
Absolutely.
He'd just look like a gorilla.
But that's what behind a drum. That's kind of drummer I want.
Excellent. So Levi Bell, and then on bass. So they are the link between the rhythm and the melody in the band.
It's Geno Smith, man. Geno Smith.
I was going to say a little bit kooky at times. So.
Right, but also, doesn't he just look like a bass player?
Yeah, you could imagine
Imagine he'd
him,
have
the bass
that kind of
face.
the stink face
Yeah.
thing. Like he just looks the part. Plus, just tall and lanky, and it looks like he'd have some rhythm and he'd be pretty smooth. Because we are going to have some ballads. Even the rock bands, you got to have the monster ballads, right?
I like
So
that.
I don't know about his musical taste or rocker, but just from a personality and a look standpoint and an aesthetic, he's the first one that popped into my head.
I'll tag him on social media and see what he says. If he comes back with I'm more of a lead guitarist, I would want proof.
Yeah.
So next one, rhythm guitar. They propel the song, the song's beat and the melody forward. Who would you say does that? Someone who's steady in the background but propels that song forward.
Yeah, that one's tough. I'm trying to think in terms that are analogous to playing football, right? Okay. Okay. I'm gonna go Bobby Wagner on this one.
Okay.
Because it's sort of what I touched on earlier. It gives me another chance to get him in the band, right? Because he makes sure that everything is running smoothly.
Yep.
And when other people are out of time, right, and not doing their jobs properly, he can keep them. I mean, that lends itself to the rhythm section too. But rhythm guitar kind of drives the melody of the song. And I think that's what we're going to see from him when he's on the field. He's not going to be on the field as much as we were used to seeing him before a couple of years ago. But when he's out there, he'll be a stabilizing force. And I think that's what you want from your rhythm guitar player. He's got to be on time. He's got to have a steady hand.
I'm intrigued now to see who's going to be the last two. So obviously in any rock band, you need to have a lead guitarist. You need to have an absolute star who's able to bring the noise. They can rip off a huge solo and drop the massive chords that everybody knows. Who would be your lead guitarist for our Seahawks band?
You got to look badass too, right? Abe Lucas is my lead guitar player.
Yes. That is the name I was looking for.
Because he's here. Who's the guy? Was it his name Kane? There was a dude that used to play guitar in Alice Cooper's band, and he was always shirtless. He was just shredded. He looked like a bodybuilder playing guitar. It was a weird visual. But
it's not Jack Wild, is it?
Abe is kind of brooding. He's a quiet dude. A lot of lead guitar players are quiet. They let the lead singer be the one that takes the spotlight. But the way he plays too, just like fast and furious, and he punishes dudes. I think his name this year. I would be shocked if he's not in the NFL top 100 next year. I think he's going to make that kind of ascension around the league. And when it comes time to pay those two bookends, he might be a guy that commands a little bit a bigger contract even than Charles Cross. I think right tackle now is considered on par with left tackle in the league, and I think he's ready to take that next step. And I can see him. We're gonna have a pretty badass looking rock band because I immediately knew who my lead singer was going to be.
Okay, then. I'm just happy you got Abe Lucas in there, the man that I see regularly wearing band T-shirts, and I thought that is my.
And he's a Coug. He went to my college. I was
going to say he went to Wazoo, didn't he?
Right.
So it's kind of a logical step for you. So your front man, the focal point of the band, they're confident, charismatic, they're able to carry a band on their shoulders. Who is it going to be?
I think there's only one answer, because you got to look the part too. You got to look the part. You got to have the personality. And don't know if the guy can sing or not, but I bet he can put on. He can be the front man. That if he hits an off note here and there, he'll just carry through it. Yep. And plus, you got to have the hair. It's Colby Parkinson. Colby Parkinson's my lead singer. Right? We're gonna have a big band. First of all, also you can't put someone small. You can't put Ken Walker or Kobe Bryant out there as your lead singer next to Abe Lucas as your lead guitar player, right? Like your lead singer has to be
big, larger than charge.
Yeah, absolutely. He has to be larger than life. So if Abe Lucas is going to be your lead guitar player, you got to put a 6'7" dude out there with flowing locks. If Luke Wilson was still on the team, it would have been a no-brainer, right? Yeah. But maybe Colby Parkinson's kind of the next best thing to Luke Wilson on this current roster.
If Luke Wilson was still on the team, I think we'd have a bit of a crossover genre. It'd be a bit like a pitch shifter or an Enter Shikari because of his love for techno.
Well, and if it was Luke too, though, he'd probably be the lead singer, but also play lead guitar.
Yeah, that's
he'd be one of those dudes. Yeah.
So I'll just rehash this really quickly before we sign off. We've got on drums the absolute machine that is Levi Bell. On bass with the stank face is Geno Smith. Rhythm guitar, just keeping everyone in line, is Bobby Wagner. You've got your lead guitarist, someone who's large, in charge, can pull off huge solos and turn heads, is Abe Lucas. And then for a frontman who's confident, charismatic, with a great head of hair, is Colby Parkinson. That, my friend, is a heck of a lineup. And I'm going to put it out there on the pod now. If any of our listeners want to name that band, I may think of something that I can send you away from us, because I need a name for that band and I need to put it on a graphic. So with that, all I've got left to do is say, Dan, thank you so much. Please tell everyone who's listening and watching where they can find you.
Thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure finally getting connected and getting on your show. And I'll have you on mine soon, and we'll just kind of do this thing, right? So Seahawks Forever is the podcast. That's my handle on Twitter too. You can follow me there. The YouTube channel, just punch in. I think it's technically it's Seahawks Forever Dan Viens, Viens, but just type in Seahawks Forever and you'll find the channel. Please subscribe. Trying to get to 3,000 before the regular season starts. We're getting there. We're at about 2,300 now, and I do some solo shows and analyze things and give my thoughts, but I like to have guests on too, other podcasters, other media members. And as the show grows, then, it gives better access to guests as well. And then I'm really excited about a new project, a new app that's out there called Pro Sports Fan app, PSF. You can download it on iPhone now. If it's not in the Google Play Store or on Android today, then it will be within the next couple of days. It's an interactive fan experience where we can live stream. Fans can join in and join with us. I am re-partnering with my old co-host from Field Goals, Dana O'Gorman. This app is the president of the app of the company is Sean Salisbury, the former ESPN broadcaster. Now he's in Houston Sports Talk Radio, and he's a quarterback guru and played for the Seahawks a long, long time ago as well in his rookie year out of USC. Really excited about his excitement and the potential for this. And the crux of it, there'll be midweek shows, which will basically be a podcast, but it's all done live from your phone. You don't need any special equipment. Anyone can join in. But the game day experience, where think Manning cast, but fans get to join in too. So Dana and I will be on during the entirety of the games live. Real-time stats are going to be displayed throughout the game on the app, and we'll be able to react to the game in whichever way we want to, analyze it, get pissed, criticize it, celebrate together, experience losses together. Really excited about that. It's PSF, Pro Sports Fan app. Download it now. It's going to be free for the first couple of months of the season. It will eventually have a small subscription price, but it'll be free to start with. So I'm excited about that as well.
If I'm right, it'll cost you per month as much as a coffee.
Sean Salisbury says less than a cup of coffee these days. So I don't know what that price is, maybe $4.99, something along those lines. But I think it's, from what I've done some run throughs, and I've been in some of the chat rooms already. I think it's a game changer. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, I hope I can get it on our iTunes store over here in the UK, because we have our own little thing that we tend to do. We have a Discord channel for anyone who wants to join that. Obviously, you can follow down on everything that is mentioned there. I will happily
all the podcast apps as well, all the audio podcast apps as well. Yeah.
If you follow me on Twitter, it's Josh_WTS, or maybe We Talk now. I need to double check that. But you'll find me commenting or resharing a lot of Dan's stuff as well. So by all means, follow, like. You can find us on X/Twitter, TikTok, on Instagram at We Talk Seahawks, on YouTube at We Talk Seahawks Podcast. We're on all of your favorite podcasting apps. We'll be bringing out more and more content as the season goes on. Hopefully, we will hear Dan and see him on our main pod as well with Pez and Jim. But for that, Dan, I like to finish with a Go Hawks. Would you care to join me?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I'll break it down on 3. 1, 2, 3. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.